Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. My name is Claire Shine. I'm the Vice President and Chief Program Officer at Salzburg Global Seminar. And on behalf of our whole team, I am so delighted to welcome you to this room with a Zoom for a truly important conversation. For those of you who do not yet know Salzburg Global, I want to say a very few words about why our history resonates with why we've all come together today. We have a complex history that is rooted in power, persecution, and renewal. We were founded as an international nonprofit in 1947, right at the end of the Second World War, as the vision of three young people who met in Harvard and who were inspired by governments creating the Marshall Plan for European economies. But our young founders had a deeply human vision to create a Marshall Plan of the mind, to bring people together after the deep and terrible ravages of war and conflict. Our first co-chair was an extraordinary man, F.O. Matthiessen. And as a personal level, as some of you may know, he fought against archaic attitudes towards homosexuality for all his life. And very sadly, he suffered from Great Depression and eventually killed himself. But he is the co-chair in 1947 for what was then called the Salzburg Seminar in American Studies, made a statement of purpose that really still informs everything that we do. I'm going to quote from him now. We have come to Salzburg to enact anew the chief function of culture and humanitarianism, and to communicate with one another again in ways that cut through prejudice and destroy the barriers of ignorance and hate. That was an extraordinary statement to make of a group of people who included people on both sides of the divide in World War II. And that act of bridging divides to transform systems has inspired our work over nearly 75 years. We've had around 38,000 fellows now from 175 countries with this mission to challenge current and future leaders to shape a better world. And across our program portfolio, those commitments, those values are still guiding the way we work with very, very diverse communities to help our societies and our economies to flourish. We've worked throughout our history on human rights, on the rule of law, on pluralism, trust, and openness. And it's not for nothing that our unspoken mantra is be tough on the issues and kind on each other. And kindness at the frontiers of interdisciplinarity, of intersectionality, of deep cultural divides seems to us to be at a premium now more than ever. So today is a wonderful opportunity to celebrate the work of Salzburg Global's LGBT Forum. Since 2013, we've traveled a pretty extraordinary journey to forge a truly inclusive and diverse community of fellows across more than 70 countries. It's easy now in 2020 to underestimate how we too had to fight against prejudice, against ignorance, deal with our own learning as we sought to bring down those divides and open up a community where everybody felt safe, regardless of their sexuality, their gender, their religion, their background, everything. This is a place of coming together. 2020 has been another bold step forward. The topic you are talking about today is one of the most rich but complex amongst any topics in the world. And we are opening up debate around the very deepest areas of human belief and experience. We believe that the forum, building on this year's work, is providing a unique online space for faith communities and networks to talk openly about LGBT issues as they affect your lives, your hopes, your fears, and the way you would like to see your societies move forward. I'd like to close with warmest thanks to the organizations and individuals who've made all our work possible, and especially the series of blogs, of online meetings, and now this public webinar today. First, thank you to our collaboration partner, ILGA Asia. Thank you to the German Corporation for International Cooperation, normally known as GIZ, for their most generous underwriting, and to the Archangel Michael Foundation, which has been a true supporter for many years for the forum. Last, but of course not least, people make this happen, all of you, the work that forum members have created so far, and to the wonderful duo of Antonio Riolino and the forum's chair and founder, Klaus Müller, for leading this work forward with such a great spirit. With that, thank you for sharing your time with us today. And now I will pass over to Klaus Müller to take you forward. Klaus, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Claire, for your kind words. Welcome to our conversation on LGBT and faith. Claire already introduced it, so how do we engage? This year, the Salzburg Global LGBT Forum started a new initiative on LGBT and faith, convening human rights defenders and cultural and religious leaders across faith communities, geographies, and generations. Our weekly online blog series on LGBT and faith that went from early August to late November begins a global conversation on inclusive approaches in faith communities. Today, we want to share with you some of the outcomes, mindsets, and themes of our online blogs and group discussions. We welcome your questions in the chat function, which will feed into our conversations and ongoing program development. Where do we start? We start by stating the obvious. We all live in cultures and societies that were and are formed by religious traditions and expressions of faith. Worldwide, LGBT people are insisting on their inclusion in faith communities and cultural traditions. Many religious congregations have begun to interpret their own beliefs in more inclusive ways. Based in our work on securing fundamental human rights, Salzburg Global supports these emerging positive changes to advance LGBT equality globally. Geographically, our session connects fellows from 17 countries, from Asia, Africa, South and North America, and Europe. And our audience today, you, come and join us from 29 countries. Thank you. Thematically, our online forum on LGBT and faith brings together members and leaders of faith communities from denominations within Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Sikhism, as well as agnostics, atheists, anthropologists, and cultural believers. What do we learn? Listening to each other, we learn not only that, but how we live in cultures shaped by religion and faith. Many fellows shared with great honesty their personal journey of faith, the obstacles and opportunities they are facing, their ideas for change, and if they experience progress or backlash. Listening to their life stories, we understand faith communities that are unresponsive to the needs of the LGBT members counteract their core values of love, inclusion, and community. The blog series confirms the reality. If we don't win faith communities as supporters and allies, it will be difficult to make long-term progress on LGBT equality in general. We also hear LGBT communities emphasizing and valuing their diversity are in a constant process to make space for all within their communities, but there can be friction when LGBT people of faith come out as such within LGBT communities. LGBT communities do fight for the right to define one's own gender identity, for marriage equality, for the right to have families, supporting our sisters and brothers who strive for inclusion in their faith community is an integral part of this call for equality. Our initiative adheres to freedom of religion as a principle that supports the freedom of an individual or community to worship or practice their religion, the freedom to change one's religion, and the freedom to not practice a religion. Freedom of religion is a fundamental human rights for all, and it cannot and should not be taken away because you're LGBT. Today, we structure our conversation with two panels. Each panel will have about 30 minutes, and we will be guided by our global group of fellows. And it's now my pleasure and honor to introduce you to our first panel, and I would ask our panelists, Tashi, Iglesia, Thomas, and Joy, also to open their videos already at this point. Tashi Chutab is a practicing Buddhist monastic, human rights and interfaith activist using they, them as pronouns, asserting their non-binary gender identity. Tashi is based out of Bodh Gaya, India, where they live at the Root Institute for Wisdom Culture and study Buddhist philosophy. Reverend Ecclesia de Lange is an ordained minister of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, but was suspended and discontinued as a Methodist minister in February 2010 after announcing to her congregation that she was going to marry her same-sex partner. Today, Ecclesia is Director of Inclusive and Affirming Ministry in South Africa. Father Thomas Ninan is the General Coordinator of the Esha Project of the Christian Service Agency mandated by the National Council of Churches in India, which brings together Protestant and Orthodox churches, as well as economical organizations and regional councils, representing about 14 million people in India. His projects include establishing an advanced institute on gender, sexuality, and religion in Nagpur, India. Joy Ladin is an American poet and the David and Ruth Gottesman Chair in English at Stern College for Women at Yeshiva University, New York. She's the first openly transgender professor at an Orthodox Jewish institution. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining our panel today. Tashi, I would like to start with a question for you. You shared with us your individual journey of faith from Hinduism, looking at Christianity, that ultimately brought you to embrace Buddhism and to become a monastic. And I will each panelist I will ask to start with one word to engage us. So what is for you the most important word that comes to mind to describe your journey?
Like you explained my journey from Hinduism through Christianity to Buddhism, I think my word would be change.
That's a good. So explain us your journey of change. How did your spiritual needs start, and how did you give form to them?
Born in a Hindu family, for me, my first footing of faith was the religion I was born into, the family that I was born into. But something it was clear to me was that religion is not source of my faith. But I knew that my faith was significantly important to me because even before I knew my queerness or my gender identity or my sexuality, that was my first queer engagement. Although my religion facilitated my engagement with faith, the way I read my faith, the way I experienced it, it is very personal, intimate to me. It is not how the religion dictated, but it is how I choose to experience it. So in that sense, for me, my spiritual needs are important as they are the other social, political, cultural, economical needs are. I think they are important for everyone else too. And
you make a distinction between religion and faith. Can you explain that a little bit more? You claim a certain independence, I think.
I do. I think for me, at least from where I look at religion, is founded on the basis of faith. Like it's a house that holds faith, or tries to nurture and at least supposed to nurture faith, in my sense. And but faith is not dependent on anything. There are people who practice their faith outside religious organization institutions all the time. I remember one of my teacher constantly used to say that when time comes, Christ need to be liberated from church. Christ is not bound to church, any church. Similarly, I don't think any faith is bound to any religious organization. Religion needs faith. Faith doesn't need religion. No one's faith does need religion in that sense.
Yet you have become a monastic, so you have a community. How does your community react to you being who you are?
I think there are all kinds of people with all kinds of faith, and so there are all kinds of reactions too. So some, of course, are at least in my limited experience so far, some are okay with it. They are curious. They do not know what it means to have a monastic who does not want to be called monk, but monastic, and who doesn't go by pronouns that are he or she, but they. That kind of makes it challenging, I believe. But nonetheless, as Buddhists, we are supposed to believe in impermanence. If there is no belief in impermanence, there is no Buddhism in that sense. I mean, you can't be a Buddhist to begin with. So if they believe in impermanence, they need to see that they need to be ready for the change that I'm bringing in our communities and in our faith groups, I think. And in spite, even if there is some resistance, I think they are doing okay. We are recognizing and accepting that impermanence.
Do you feel there's a growing understanding?
There is very much. I think I've met people who are Buddhists, transgender people, gay men, cis gay men, bisexual folks. I met people of many LGBTQ identities within Buddhist faith. I think that engagement is happening, but not as much as it should, I think. As much as we call ourselves a much better progressive religion in that sense, but there's much more work need to be done.
So there's more dialogue needed. I want to quote one sentence that I really liked in your blog, and I quote, "My faith has helped me with my queerness, and my queerness helps me in making my faith inclusive." So you are on that journey on helping to make Buddhism more inclusive.
I am. I think it's a responsibility of every person who is part of any faith group to make their faith spaces inclusive, whether you're queer or not, and make them accessible to all the people, irrespective of their gender, sex, caste, class, region, doesn't matter. I mean, if you fail to do that, you're failing your faith community. You are failing the community that you're part of. And your contribution is to make it accessible and open and inclusive to everyone, I think. And I'm trying. I'm not sure how much I'm doing it, but I'm trying, I can say.
Thank you, Tashi. Let me bring in Reverend Ecclesia de Lange. Ecclesia, you share in your blog a difficult journey of faith that includes years of self-denial, then your suspension of as a Methodist minister when you announced to your congregation that you're going to marry your same-sex partner. Still, you state in your blog, and I quote, "I survived the most difficult part of the journey, self-acceptance, and made it through not broken, but more confident and complete than I ever was." You have been engaged in dialogues and building dialogues between faith and LGBT communities for many years. What is the one word most relevant for you in that process?
Hello, Klaus. I think I've got two words. Can I have two words, please? Yes. The first one will be intentional, and the second, courage.
Explain to us, what do you mean by intentional and what do you mean by courage in that bridge building you're engaged in?
Well, within the dialogue process, one has to be intentional. It's a collaborative effort. People really need to buy into this process. It's a process that brings diverse people together to build a bridge towards a greater understanding and reconciliation of inclusion. So one has to be intentional about it, otherwise you fall into the trap of debate, and be intentional about including LGBT persons in this conversation, in this process. In the process of opening minds and safety in this space, one has to be cautious and aware that it is a process and it's a repetitive process. It's not just a once-off and there you go and people are included. It's something that needs to be repeated as you go deeper. It involves people. It involves knowing where they find themselves, knowing their content, what is their understanding, what is their knowledge, and then of course their context, where they find themselves, their location. And participants are invited into this dialogue space with an open mind and to commit to the process. Creating a safe and a brave space that requires vulnerability, it requires courage, it requires good listening skills, communication and conflict management, all of that.
So it's a considerable time investment that you say. It's repetitive, it's long-term. It's a long-term process that you're engaging in.
Absolutely. It's a slow process. You cannot rush the process. And it's not a hit and run thing. It's you taking people on a journey. As they open up a little bit more, you can give more information and share more. So it's a process of transformation, and we call our dialogue a transformative dialogue process, where we include different voices during this process, and the traditional views of human sexuality, as people that are very conservative and that hold on to their beliefs, are very closed. And if you give them the space to work through the ideas and the sacred texts that are challenging, somehow they will get through a process that is very challenging. Those who thought that they had all the answers start feeling a bit shaky. The ground starts to shake because things are not as certain and cut and dry, black and white. There's a whole lot of gray in between. It's a position of discomfort and a creative space to learn new skills. Participants are always, yeah.
Let me ask you, I do understand that transformation. I think what we learn from the engagement by readers of our blogs in the comment section of the blog series, there are many shared experiences of exclusion, like you had it in marginalization, but also of resilience and resistance. So how do we deal with the time needed for transformation when people are actually suffering from that exclusion? What time horizon can we realistically take on? And what do we do with those people who suffer in the meantime? That's not
a quick and an easy answer. It's a slow process. We have to get to that point. It's a slow process. The slowness of the process is often painful, as you've just indicated. And it's even in my case, you think to yourself, when will this ever happen? I will be very old and very gray one day if the church were to decide. And often people then give up and just say, well, they've had enough of this community, and they leave the church. So yes, it's a slow process. You need to encourage people to hold on to the process, to engage in the process, not to lose faith in the process. And therefore, people like myself and like Tashi and everyone else on this, the forum that we've had and the discussions that we've had, our lives encourage others to hang in there. And slowly but surely, as in my case, where the Christian denominations, as they open, other denominations are encouraged. And if it's possible, for instance, in the Dutch Reformed Church, then the Methodist Church of Southern Africa just changed recently in the first week of October, they've changed their policy. But we also know that policy don't change behavior. We have to work with people, they embody their faith. Laws don't change people's hearts and behavior. We actually need to walk with them the road and encourage them not to give up. I see a lot of recognition in Tashi. I think he completely enjoy. So what I hear is it takes time, a transformation, if it's sustainable and substantial, can't be rushed. But I also hear hope both from Tashi and you, that you see changes before you turn gray. Yes. So I am gray. I have turned gray, and that is just how it is. But I never thought, for example, that the Methodist Church would change their policy. When I was discontinued in 2010, it's 10 years later. And yeah, so there is hope. It's just slow, and we need to hang in there. And if we talk about sustainable change, we need to go slow. Yeah. Thank you, Aglisha. I'm encouraged by that hope that I get from you and also Tashi. And I turn to Father Thomas Ninan. Thomas, you are part of the large network of the National Council of Churches in India that decided to engage into a process of change early on and to become more inclusive for LGBT communities. So how can faith communities support inclusive dialogues?
Is it public statements? Is it visibility to the congregation? Yes, we are in a process of change. And before you answer that in more detail, what is for you the one word, the one value, I would say, that you bring to this process?
Hi, everyone. For me, the one word that comes to mind is listening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what qualities does listening brings to the conversation on LGBT inclusion?
So listening is a two-way process. It's not a one-way process. And it's crucial that we listen to the lives and the life realities of the LGBTIQ communities. We realized this way back in 2001. The National Council of Churches in India, when the ecumenical leaders engaged with the LGBTI communities for the first time. And that has been the crucial process of reflection and change in being able to understand scriptures, faith journey in a totally new way. And that has helped us in being able to understand ourselves, understand life realities as we engage through these years. Yeah.
So when you opened up to really look at the life realities of LGBT people, what was this process like and what did you see?
Yeah. So we have, as NCCI, provided an interfaith, inter-church platform for faith communities for a healthy conversation on gender diversities and sexuality identities. And what we saw was there was a huge lot of stigma and perceptions among faith communities, which through such a conversation, we were able to address and, and these stigma and among faith communities, especially the traditional understanding of scriptures, this we were able to engage in a more relevant and meaningful way. And this helped us to bring out some very crucial statements over the years, which meant a lot to be able to understand a very sensitive area like gender and sexuality. And these statements were also crucial because it helped our network, 30 denominations coming from different Protestant and Orthodox traditions, to be able to make a start. And this was our starting point. These statements assured churches in different diversities to be able to understand something that we were all hesitant about to be able to engage with. So these were crucial as we journeyed through this listening process.
So the process, of course, can always run into problems. You are in the process in 2001. You issued major statements, as you said, some of them on HIV. You intervened also with the repeal of the sodomy law by a public statement and many others. And one of my favorite sentences actually is in the Declaration on Interfaith Engagement with Human Sexuality and Gender Diversity, and I quote, where you state, and the NCCI, the National Council of Churches in India states, I quote, the innate ability of each faith community to understand, accept, and celebrate gender, sexual, and sexuality identities. Yeah. Is that utopia, or are you halfway with that?
No. You see, that's the magic that this listening process has brought forth. As we engaged in that listening process through the many engagements in the form of workshops, in the form of dialogues, honest people get into a process of reflection. And that is where we realize that there are strengths within our own church traditions, within our own faith traditions, which we are able to accept, include, and celebrate gender and sexuality diversities. So it's not an overnight journey, but you listen to these life realities, and somebody who is passionate about this will continue to go and think. And it's I mean, this is a faith journey, and there is that constant, I believe, guidance of God, and in all this that we have engaged with. And so that is the God and faith experience that we have realized. And these were new realities that helped us in this faith journey and affirmed us in being able to take a prophetic stance. That's what I would say. A prophetic stance based on rights-based approach.
Thank you. And I mean, I just have because we integrated this sentence in the description of our faith initiative. So we were very impressed by it. And we hope that that actually is not just an utopia, but is the way where we all move. I turn to Joy, Joy Ledin. Joy, and we talked about this, when we started this initiative, I think we mentally still held on to the imagined separation of LGBT people on one hand and faith communities on the other hand, as two communities that are being opposed to each other. And of course, there are difficulties, and we have had many examples and heard them throughout the blog series. But LGBT people have been, are, and will be part of faith communities, and people of faith have been and are and will be part of LGBT communities. What do we do with that? And you write in your blog that we need to get rid of the we versus them distinction. So how do we shape a conversation that is not based in that construction, and what for you is the most important keyword in that maneuver?
Thank you, Klaus. The most important word for me is us, and not because I'm an American and I like the letters US, but actually in the sense of us. And I'm reminded of what Tashi was saying about religions needing faith inside them. And the thing about faith living inside religious communities and traditions is it can be either seen as strengthening and making more rigid the sense of what people believe, like our faith in God leaks into our faith in human categories and distinctions, or that faith can force us to constantly expand and blur and even dissolve those human categories. So as a religious person, I've always been fond of the definition of God that says God is the center that's everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. And I think that that is a definition of the ideal religious community. And this is utopian. This is not the way human communities work. However, if you say our religious community needs to aspire to be a reflection of the divinity that we serve, the divinity that we serve has a center that is everywhere. There's nowhere that's farther from the creator of the universe. There's nowhere that's closer to the creator of the universe. That center is everywhere. There's no them because there's no outside. This is what our community should aspire to. Us usually in human communities means the opposite. We want to know who we are, who's us in relation to us, who do we owe money to, who do we have duties to, who do we have to say be complimentary to even if we don't like them because they have power, who do we feel particularly obliged to. We need these categories. However,
so how do we get rid of, because you said it yourself, communities often describe themselves by defining who belongs, that's the we, and who does not belong, the them. And that's an self-identification of community that constructs community. How do we get rid of it? How can we merge the us and the them in a different way?
So there are several different strategies. In many traditional communities, one of the ways is to recognize that with LGBTQ people, the them is actually our children and our parents. our elders, our aunts, our uncles. The them really is us in terms of family. Another way is, as Thomas and Ecclesia were saying, is by listening to the voices of the people in our community who are talking about those experiences and recognizing, oh, this is us speaking, this isn't them. But the way that I propose in my blog is something that's a bit more radical in a way. I asked myself, what is the experience that every human being in a community has? And that experience is the experience of feeling like them. You can't be human without having felt marginalized and pushed away in some spaces, even though you may feel central in other spaces. And in the Hebrew Bible, there is a command. God says, when you see the stranger, don't mistreat the stranger, because you know the soul of the stranger. You were strangers in the land of Egypt. That's the spiritual discipline that this is saying. It's saying when you see somebody that you see as them, and stranger here means somebody who resides in your community, but you look at them and you say, yeah, you're not part of us. God says, oh, actually, when you see somebody that you respond to like that, do the spiritual discipline of remembering your own experience of being seen as a stranger. Remember that you are them. Not that that means that they're exactly like you, no, but that you have this experience of being them in common, and create a sense of us where the foundation of it is the shared experience of them. That to me is the way of a way that we can dissolve that distinction without erasing difference, without pretending that there aren't differences. There are differences.
And you give a very beautiful definition of what inclusion means, and I quote from your blog. That is what inclusion means. It means our communities feel incomplete when those we see as different in certain ways aren't there. So if I go, thank you, Joy. If I go to the four of you, where are we in the process of becoming more inclusive? I heard, are you all confident, hopeful, and you know how to further progress a more inclusive approach? Is this where we as a group stand? And any one of you, please.
I think, Klaus, for where I stand or sitting right now, we have experience, but there's so much more to learn. And to have an open spirit of saying, I will learn, and there are always strangers that you meet on the road. I love what Joy has been speaking about, the stranger. I know exactly what it feels like to be a stranger. And there's always, I'm always amazed at the diversity of people. And often I meet very strange people. And it is a discomforting space to find yourself, because you don't know how to approach, what must you say, how will this person experience me? So there's always room to learn more, better skills. And but we are definitely equipped to continue the journey, and we will learn as we go along. That is what I sense.
I mean, there is hope. And like Ecclesia said, hang in there, right? But the thing is that we hang in there with each other. And there is hope within each other to be with each other and to help each other in that learning, and to, to look forward, I think. And that's what's significantly important for us to come together like this and to have these conversations.
I would just like to build on what Tashi was saying, because in the United States, we're unfortunately in the middle of this mass experiment that's demonstrating the degree to which our ability to recognize one another as human, our sense of virtue, our sense of what is good and what is bad, our sense of what Thomas has very movingly written about as the love that he thinks that's the test of any religious tradition is it making you more loving? Is it challenging you in those kinds of ways? That's on one another. If we surround ourselves, if we live in an echo chamber of voices that dehumanize, that keep telling us this person is them, this person is them, this person is them, and encouraging us to retreat in those kinds of ways from God, from love, then that's the direction that we'll move in. So I'm not optimistic that there's a final victory. You know, the nature of humanity is change, is dynamism, right? That's our glory and that's our pitfall. And we do need one another to constantly call us to the best of ourselves. And Ecclesia, your example of you meet somebody who's strange in a way that makes you uncomfortable and you're like, oh, wow, I've got some learning to do. This is fantastic, right? That is a model for me. That's something that will remind me to be a better person the next time I'm in that situation.
Yeah, I'm glad that we are dealing with human beings and not computers, and robots, human being blessed with a heart. And this whole process of inclusivity is about the process of, it's a journey of love, how loving we become day by day, and I don't see any hitches there as we grow in love. May it be cultures, church traditions, everything will come in place and as we grow in love. So that's the hope I have. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for these perspectives, Joy, Tashi, Ecclesia, and Thomas. I think personally, I also would like to, this coming together and the blog series has been a huge learning curve, I think, for all of us, certainly for me. And so I feel a whole space has been opened and the cooperation and conversation between us is hopefully something that we can continue in 21. For a moment, I would ask you kindly to switch off your video because I would like to introduce another fellow right now. Born to Indian migrant parents, Gushaten, or Nanu. Hello, Nanu. Sandhu works at the United Nations Non-Discrimination and Equal Pay Program Officer, and he serves as president of the UN Globe, advocating for the equality and non-discrimination of LGBT staff in the United System. Nanu will share us how we as a total group of fellows developed in one of our online meetings a snapshot of keywords. I asked everybody, what is your keyword that is important for the process in which we are? So we developed as a group a snapshot of keywords in a word cloud. We feel relevant for our discussion. And Nanu, can you guide us on what we see on the screen?
Well, thank you very much, Klaus, and thank you for inviting me as well and being part of this amazing experience and journey with you all. So after one of the sessions, we all came together and looked at the and shared amongst ourselves as a group what were the key messages and themes of our discussions of the blog from the blogs. As a representative of the group, so I'm sharing with you here what you see is the word cloud that we came up with. Now, immediately you'll be drawn to the word empathy. But let's not forget, and let's look around the word empathy as well and look on the fringes of this word cloud, because those words are also equally important as well. I think for me, listening to the previous panel, some of the keywords that came out were patience, and it's a slow process and journey. I think in today's world of immediacy, where everything is available at the touch of a screen or a button, we want everything to happen now, and we forget to engage and have that understanding and that dialogue. So I think here, some of the key messages from the blogs have been, that we need patience. We must understand that it's a slow process. And more importantly, that it's a dialogue. We need that exchange, even when it is in points when it is uncomfortable, but we must keep on going and keep on engaging. I think one of the key things that I think is also is how we have a dialogue it's not just a dialogue with the other side, so to speak, but a dialogue amongst ourselves as well. And more importantly, how we have a dialogue with ourselves as individuals. How are we talking to ourselves? Are we having the same compassion, love, respect, care that we need for us as individuals to ensure that we can actually engage in those discussions as well? And I think it's important that we, recognize words such as authentic, so that we can be authentic, and that's where the authenticity comes to play. Then we have other words such as journey. As we've said, it is a slow process and journey, and that it takes time. And there are other parts of the word cloud, such as disruptive, empathy, and skilling. And that talks about how we come into spaces and make sure that we disrupt it, we change the narrative perhaps and challenge it, but do it in a positive or in a constructive way that allows us to keep that dialogue going as well. And I think more importantly, as a queer Sikh person who's gender fluid, I think intersectionality is key. And not just holding faith, but holding sexual orientation, gender identity, in race, ethnicity, age, location, etc., and class, someone also mentioned. So that's really key to this discussion as well, that we need to bring in those different viewpoints and make sure that those people are at the table as well. I think the other part of this is that we must keep us together as well. And I think I've really resonated with what Joy's blog said about, not in a language of us, but we and others, but more us as well. So with that, Klaus, I'm going to hand over. That's some of the key findings, or my personal findings of the journey so far in this word cloud. Thank you again, Klaus.
Thank you, Nano, for sharing with us some of the group process, which also was very helpful to develop further our blog series. And it's now my pleasure to invite our panelists for the second panel. And I would ask them already to put on their video. Thank you. So Reverend, let me just correct this. Yeah, Reverend Dr. Scott Sherman is the Executive Director of the New Begin House of Studies, a center for graduate theological education and spiritual formation based in San Francisco, and a candidate for the priesthood in the Episcopal Church. Ahmed Al-Hardi is an international recognized neuroscientist and political activist currently studying the neural basis of decision-making at Princeton University, United States. He closely works with international organizations to lobby the Egyptian government to release political prisoners and improve its records on LGBT rights. And Saskia Wieringer is professor of gender and women's same-sex relations cross-culturally at the University of Amsterdam, a human rights activist and genocide researcher. She has published widely on sexual politics in Indonesia, women's empowerment, and heteronormativity in Asia. She's presently working on a book on the history of the LGBT movement in Indonesia. A very warm welcome to the three of you. And I start with Scott engaging. Scott, you emphasized in your blog how important conversations on LGBT inclusion within faith communities are and how you have been changed because of them. What is for you the most important value that you bring to these conversations? And again, maybe first starting with the one key word that you bring to that process.
Yeah, the one key word for me is the one you saw at the center of the word cloud: empathy.
Empathy, okay.
Empathy,
so we're
yeah.
not wrong as a group. So can you explain what empathy means for you personally in this conversation in which you engage?
Sure. Well, you mentioned that I'm a candidate for the Episcopal priesthood, but for 30 years I have been a minister in a mainline denomination where this issue has been fraught. And there's this false narrative at work that saw LGBT people as outsiders. And as I began to hear their stories, you know, the courage of those stories, it just brought this disruptive new engagement with a reality I just couldn't ignore. The idea, the framing that this was somehow a secular intrusion into our faith community, it just ceased to be credible. Because if you think of what Joy was saying about, you know, we're all of them, or, you know, you were a stranger, it's almost another perspective, which is I actually recognize them as an us. I recognized that this was internal testimony. They weren't outsiders. And there was something profoundly disruptive about that. The French social theorist, René Girard, calls this the power of disruptive empathy. I say in the blog, I could no longer unsee what I was seeing or unhear what I was hearing. And the empathy, the respect, it just starts to build. You can't unsee it. And it begins to disrupt for me, it disrupted my previously constructed narrative.
So this is, in your blog, you describe how you have been changed. And in the beautiful sentence you just quoted, I could no longer unsee what I was seeing or unhear what I was hearing. And you connect that to a movement, a process that you bring back to Vatican II. But you also talk about the twin movements that are necessary to advance inclusive approaches. So the twin movements, and I quote, of contemporary engagement, and I think that's where the empathy comes in, that you look at the lives of people, the engagement to listen to others, to their life stories, and I continue the quote, reappropriating the tradition. What do you mean by reappropriating the tradition?
Yeah, I referenced this historic movement within Vatican II of these twin moves. Ressourcement, which was a French notion of going back to the sources, back to the tradition, to really look at it in a fresh way. And aggiornamento, the idea of opening up and engaging with contemporary questions. When it comes to engaging with the tradition, what I wanted to point out was that queerness brings something deeper. It's not just a fresh perspective. It's actually bringing something deeper out of the tradition itself. Because if you think of marginalized folks who are insiders, they're kind of at the inside of the edge. They bring questions of what is accepted. They bring perspectives that I find just deepen the imagination, and it becomes a real gift for the community, the faith community, not only to just think about, sort of where we are now, but to actually reflect on the tradition itself. One of the things I shared in my blog was one of my wife's quilts. You can see them behind me. I'm in my home in San Francisco, and they've just taken over. They're everywhere. But one of the things she does is she quilts with vintage fabrics and new fabrics. She likes to weave them together. And I use that as a kind of metaphor for what I think, as a professor, someone who teaches theology, there's something in our interpretive work, something profound that happens when you try to bring together the vintage fabric, sort of that divine word received from the past and the sacred text and its history of interpretation, with the current reality, the encounter that's happening in the community now, which I perceive is the divine word spoken into lives. And it's when those come together that something really powerful, I think, happens.
We have a question from the audience from Simon Dahlem, and he asked, and I quote, among many conservative Christian friends, The struggle is in reconciling their personal openness to their LGBTQ friends and family with their understanding of scripture, which they consider authoritative. How do you address that tension? And I think some of that you already, but I wanted to share that question with you.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time addressing that tension. The program that we run here in San Francisco, we have about 140 students who are in this program, and a number of them come from an evangelical background. And one of the real, I think this is where scholarship becomes important, because there is a sense in which with our sacred texts, even with people who claim that it is uniquely authoritative, there's a reality of pervasive interpretive pluralism. That even people who agree it's sacred really can't agree on what it says. And so gently inviting people to really explore the complexity of what's there. Again, the gift of seeing that many of the things that supposedly are condemned or supposedly are said, in fact, are not so clearly stated. So there really are pathways, I think, through the gift of scholarship to help people reappropriate, and I would say in a more meaningful way, see the text for how it actually works.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I use that as a bridge to Ahmed Al-Hardi. Ahmed, and I would like to go back to that word, empathy, yes, because it triggered something that you raised in your blog. And you expressed a skeptic view on the potential of dialogue, on the potential of empathy as a change maker. So if we focus on empathy as a bridge builder, what is your first word that comes to mind when you think about empathy?
Dangerous.
Why dangerous?
Because thinking about the situation as a whole from where I come from in Egypt, I think empathy can work with Scott as he lives in San Francisco, where there is a minimal level of civility and freedom. So in a place like Egypt, these conversations cannot happen. And here I will bring the example that I brought in the blog, my dear friend Sarah Ghazi, that I lost in June. She died of suicide in Canada in exile after being ostracized by the state and her family and the society at large. And this is just why the word dangerous come, because that's the reality we have to deal with every day. So looking at—
she became famous because of this one photo where she
yes,
sits on the shoulder of somebody listening to a Beirut group and having a rainbow flag, which
yes,
really changed her entire life.
Yes.
To worse.
So this gives you just a glimpse of what does it mean to come out, to speak up for the rights, which are related to the political situation we are living in. So I myself, I'm in exile, shunned by my own family and by the state that considered me an enemy of the state, inciting to change the regime. That's how what kind of crime they put on you if you try to just say, okay, let's treat LGBTQ community in a more humane way. And so the dialogue is important, but we should have the preconditions for it. And most of my panelists, if not all, live in places where at least this conversation can happen in the open. The second thing is there is no time for us. Even if you want to have this dialogue secretly, we have to deal constantly with people getting arrested, people suffering mental distress, people want to flee. So part of my time during the COVID lockdown, writing testimonies for asylum cases, either coming to the United States or to other places around the world. So it's very important when we bring up the dialogue is what kind of preconditions, political and societal, we need in order for this dialogue to begin to happen.
You wrote in your blog, and I quote, "I would love to see many members of the LGBT community revolting against the predominant religious discourse, but who will defend them?" You also expressed a lot of skepticism to the concept of queer Islam. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think my skepticism comes from the context in which the whole liberal Islamic interpretation came from, which is again in the liberal democratic countries like United States, United Kingdom, Germany, where first Muslims are a minority. Second, they can have this dialogue in terms of free interpretations. It first come to mind the liberal theologian Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid, the Egyptian liberal theologian. The moment he said, had like a book on liberal interpretation of Islam, he was arrested, separated from his wife, declared apostate, and had to live in exile in the Netherlands for a long time till he died. So it's definitely great that he was doing this, but the question is that whether this will work in Egypt or not under the current political circumstances where we live. And the third biggest question is whether it will work in a Muslim majority country at all or not. So that's
nevertheless, there are, of course, growing online groups that have communication and conversations about queer Islam. Is the kind of group building through online when it is too dangerous to do it on site? Is that one way to do a step further?
Yes, I think for persons, like I totally understand queer Muslims who want to accept themselves as both queer and Muslims, and this happened online for them to live at peace with their own faith, and it definitely will build some kind of like a group solidarity, but I'm still very skeptical on how much political power this will lead to in order to preserve the rights in the daily lives. But definitely on a personal level, I totally support it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ahmed. I will turn to Saskia. Saskia, you share your personal journey of faith through three religions: Protestantism, Hinduism, Islam. So what are, based also on this journey and based on you being an anthropologist, what are other means of supporting inclusive perspectives on faith and LGBT communities we have not yet maybe talked about? And what key word comes to mind for your work?
I'm a Muslim at this moment, and I'm mostly living with my partner in Indonesia, which is a majority Muslim country, as Ahmed also very well knows. The space for liberal Islam, the space for democracy is shrinking there. But I think there's one way, at least I hope, and that's where I'm contributing to, where at least we can insert ourselves in the ongoing discussions, and that is by insisting that we have a tradition.
Tradition is your keyword?
Tradition is my keyword, because so many policies in Indonesia now are being promoted in the name of tradition. But if you really look into tradition, of course, Islam was never a tradition in Indonesia, right? I mean, Islam came in the 13th century and Christianity came a bit later. And between the two of them, they have killed some of the practices of gender diversity before that. So in Indonesia, as in Southeast Asia and in many East Asian countries also, it is possible to find many traces still of traditional practices and beliefs of gender pluralism and gender diversity. Those are our traditions. And insisting that these traditions are valid is one way in which at least I contribute to the ongoing debates within Indonesia. I'm writing a book now about that. And it helps people, right? I mean, at one stage I went with my own, I call them my own, they're a bit younger than I am. I'm great to Ecclesia. Group of lesbians, we went to the National Museum and I said, now you figured out if you can find a statue of Ardanari in your own National Museum in Jakarta. And they went and they found the statue of Ardanari. And I said, what do you see in the statue of Ardanari? And they looked at it, they said, well, the left side seems to be feminine and the right side seems to be male, masculine. I said, yes, exactly. And this was a very popular deity in 14th century Java. That's why you see so many statues here. This is your tradition. And some of them burst out crying. They said, so particularly the butchers in the group. And they said, oh, so we have a history. I said, yes, you have history. And there are many, many, many more examples of that. And this is about powerful deities. And now they call themselves the Aranari Institute, right? So they preserve these traditions. And it is empowering, not because we need these traditions to revive them, because that's impossible, but because they give a different perspective, some more openness. And these traditions, of course, as also Scott was saying and Father Thomas, are to be found within the particular, also the monotheistic faith as well. In Hinduism, of course, there is enormous stories of gender diversity and gender pluralism and sex change and all that.
So how easy or difficult is this search, this research? I mean, you have done it all your life. It sounds like an archaeology to rediscover a past that often also has been systematically dissolved. So how rich is our history and are our traditions?
Our history is very rich. I've done some work in Africa as well. And you've got to, really, it's an archaeology. You've got to dig through layers of colonial racism and all kinds of bigoted interpretations, wrong translations, and all kinds of obfuscations. So you really have to be very careful when you're digging up things.
Deliberately wrong translation?
Yes. Yes, deliberate wrong interpretations. In Islam, that's very clear. If you look at the story of Lut, that has been very, very wrongly translated. I mean, this is the work of an Arabic scholar who has really done some wonderful digging up of what the story of Lut actually means, right? It's not about sodomy as such. It is about aggression and rape and violence, which is, and that is, of course, a very different story. And so within the faith traditions, you can do this work as well. And in also the pre-monotheistic religions. But we also know that even Hinduism, which I think is the most diverse religion as far as this is concerned, can be interpreted in extremely homophobic ways. So what I learned from my, well, I called her my vegetarian great aunt, that is a Buddhist nun whom I met in Singapore, and she has a lover. She was in her 80s when I met her. It was in the 1980s when I met her, and she was in her 80s, and her lover was a nun also in the 80s in Johor in Malaysia. And I asked her, vegetarian great aunt, how can we support our LGBT, well, I called it differently at that time, communities? And first she said, through religion. And I said, that's difficult sometimes, right? And then she said, through stories. And so you must keep telling your stories. You must keep telling your stories of human rights, of warmth. And I think every religion that I know of at this moment has words like compassion, love, and all the affirmative words in them, which are so often ignored, and which we are told to, which are denied to us, right? And so I think we've got to keep telling stories and recreate our stories and recreate our own traditions, build up from what we can guess and learn from the past, and infused with all the things that we are doing here in this forum, the messages of love and compassion and empathy and altruism that we see around us. It's not an easy journey. I mean, Ahmed, of course, comes from a very difficult situation. And as I said just now, the space in Indonesia is shrinking as well. It becomes dangerous to say these things. Liberal Islam, which is our natural ally, in Indonesia too, is being discarded. And one of my great friends, Mustaf Mulia, has been silenced. And if you're not careful, you're being accused of being engaging in blasphemy and And that thing is very easily said, that accusation is very easily made, and that's a very dangerous thing. It's being done regularly in Pakistan as well, right?
Thank you, and I think that we also learned from you, from especially also Ahmed, the dangers that we are in if we engage in storytelling. Within the forum, the 16 blogs that we published indeed are also a form of storytelling, because the bloggers shared with great honesty their personal journeys. So before we recap, if I look at the three of you, what did you take away from the blogs that others shared and how they shared their stories within our own blog series?
I would just say, I think I saw courage and I saw the power of story just woven all the way through. And it seems to me, I really want to recognize what Ahmed is saying in terms of danger, different places of the world. But you know, even a place like San Francisco, we just had the Transgender Day of Remembrance. There's still danger here. And I think in most movements of social change, I think if we center the voices of those, there's always, if you look at how change happens, there's always courageous people. And often they pay a great price. We're seeing this with Black Lives Matter here in the United States now, which there's storytelling, there's empathy created through it, but often at great risk.
Mm-hmm.
For me, as I told Klaus before, I think this is the first event I attend on LGBT and faith without bursting into real confrontations that people are getting mad. So I think what I got out is that this conversation can happen without people feeling so tense or offended.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's so nice to find allies, right? Sometimes you're so alone in what you're trying to do, and you've got to be very determined. But in this series and in these blogs, to find people working on similar issues from in different faiths, and I think that strengthens my conviction that every religion has a human rights possibility and women's rights and sexual rights. And we've got to expand that space and fight for that.
Saskia, Thomas, Ahmed, thank you for sharing your insights, your personal experiences, and the process that you are guiding us through, not just through your blogs, but also being part of our online group that we hope that is growing in the years to come. At this point, I would ask you to switch off your cameras because I would love to introduce another fellow, Brenda Rodriguez Allegra. Brenda, hi Brenda. Brenda completed her PhD in psychology about transgender women in the Philippines, lectures at the University of Hong Kong, and serves on the board of directors of the Society of Transsexual Women Advocates of the Philippines. And Brenda also wrote a wonderful blog in our series, which I would love to take one quote from, because I find it needs to be quoted before we go to something that we want to share together, a story and a poem. Brenda, in your blog, you say, "I still believe in God, although now I'm not trapped in the idea that our God is cisgender, straight and white and from Europe. However, it's not exactly this phase that keeps me optimistic for a bright future as a transpine. It's seeing others like me accept themselves and live their lives as if there's nothing painful surrounding their existence. I'm inspired by my fellow transpines and queer people." So having found this community in the LGBT community, in the transgender community, how important is it still for you to be part of your faith community? What drives, what is the key word that you're looking for, the key value?
Well, I want to give two. One,
Okay.
if you don't mind. Yes. Yes. So inclusion, which I think have been covered also all throughout our conversations, and that's a very powerful word for me, because I think this is something that LGBT people in general, and me as a trans woman, as a trans Pinay, has been looking for, for nearly all of my life. Actually, it's to be genuinely included, to participate, to be engaged, in conversations, because that's how we were raised in our faith community. Being raised, having been raised Catholic here in the Philippines, as a child, when before understanding, the problems, systemic problems of discrimination, prejudice, and violence towards LGBT people. As a child, I was raised to believe that the church is for everyone. It's a protective space. It accepts everyone, and that we were taught that the greatest commandment of all is love. For us to love God above all, and for us to love each other as we would ourselves. And I believed in that so much, but it's just very painful, to experience discrimination, violence, prejudice, and exclusion, not just in greater society, but in your own faith community. So when I found my LGBT and my trans families here in the Philippines, and I understood that apart from our identities being socially constructed, even families can be socially constructed. I felt that I finally belong. I had a place to go to, but I still want to keep coming back to the church, because there are many LGBT people who still hold on to their faith, because we were raised with a basic understanding, and hope in our system. We believe that there is that future wherein all of us, we will just believe in love. We will, all of these violence, towards us will be behind us, and that conversations can happen. So I am hopeful.
So you said the first, you had two words.
Yes.
The first was inclusion. What is the second word that you're looking for?
Decolonization. I think it's a conversation that we need to have here in the Philippines. That's why I said in my blog that, because that's how we were raised. We were raised into thinking that we are probably second class. Because the Philippines has been colonized for more than 400 years, and unfortunately, it's not just the good things that came out of that. It's mostly we lost ourselves, we lost our identities, and as trans people, we in particular have been searching for our identities, and sometimes it takes us a long journey, maybe even our entire lives, to have a good grip of our identities. That's why we have words like transformations, traversals, and transitions, and a lot of trans people don't even know these words and what they really mean, but they have been traversing, they have been transforming, they have been transitioning. But what they don't know is to decolonize, because we have become victims of someone else's idea of what we have to become in order for us to love ourselves. So maybe it's about time for us to accept that we have beauties, we have qualities that are natural to us, that we don't have to look to someone else's set of culture so that we can feel good about ourselves.
So I think, and we do have a powerful story that we would like to share with you, and where you will help us. Let me tell the story before you finish the story. At the very first gathering of Salzburg Global LGBT Forum in 2011, Saskia rediscovered a past, a tradition that had gone unnoticed in the 70 years of Salzburg Global. That it exists as an institution. She walked into one of the session rooms, and Saskia noticed the statue of the East Asian transgender deity Guan Yin, who is also known under the names of Kanon, Tara, and Avalokiteshvara. So in a way, it was archaeology in plain sight. And she shared that with us, her surprise, and to our surprise. And I think it was a moment in that session for the LGBT Forum that we, being for the first time at Salzburg Global, we felt we were not the first here. There is the past can be an ally. The tradition can be an ally in unexpected places. So in a way, Guan Yin unexpectedly offered us a sense of home at Salzburg Global. And that home has grown, of course, over the years. As we discovered, there are many other LGBT people before us helping to build Salzburg Global as an institution. So the LGBT Forum took it as a good sign. And in a manner of speaking, we placed our work, our gatherings under Guan Yin's protection from then on. And Saskia wrote a poem or a prayer, if you will, giving words to our journeys that we are engaging in, as different as they are, asking for protection. And Brenda, you are going to read this poem for us today with Saskia's kind willingness to share that with all of us. Please.
It is my honor. It's my honor, Klaus and Saskia. Honorable God, Goddess Guan Yin, Venerable Avalokiteshvara, Merciful Canon, Bountiful Tara, you are many and yet one, as we are. You have traveled all over continents and oceans, as we have. You went through many transformations, as we did. We ask you to protect us in our transformations and journeys, to bless our lives, to empower us through the bounty of your wisdom.
Thank you, Brenda. And now I would ask everyone to join us to unleash the camera so that we're all together as a group. And a round of thank you. I want to thank you, our panelists, Tashi, Iglesia, Thomas, Joy, Scott, Ahmed, Saskia, and of course, Nanu and Brenda. I also think we have wonderful fellows in the larger group that form the online forum on LGBT and faith, and we thank them. We have 16 amazing blogs that we published since early August to the end of November, and we are proud to have published them, and we will continue to work with them. So we really put it to your heart to look at them. I personally would love to thank our Salzburg Global team, Antonio Riolino, without him, I could not have done it. Louise Hallman for her communication skill, Ian Brown for getting us together with funding, Isabel Weber, who will write a report, and Beth Bertela, who manages our team brilliantly. And of course, Claire Schein for her support for all these years. And especially you, our audience, coming from 29 countries, that does us a lot of good. Joining us today, we encourage you to read and share the 16 blogs with friends, colleagues, faith communities, LGBT communities, and let us know what you think in our Facebook discussion that is embedded as a link in each blog. We hope, as I said, to extend our online forum on LGBT and faith in 2021, next year, to continue our blog series, finding more access ways to the blogs. And thus we really welcome your comments and suggestions as we develop our program in 2021. So a big thank you from all of us. Stay healthy, stay safe, and a good night to some, a good morning, and a good day to others. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all. Thank you, Klaus.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Klaus.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Klaus.